Hi, this is Dr. Jabali, and in this video, we're going to focus on looking at past IB exam papers, focusing on paper 1, which is all about multiple choice. And this multiple choice will only focus on topic 4.2, which is all about energy flow. So let's move into the section. So here, make sure to read the question 3 times. Don't just go once because you might make mistakes. And also remember to look at the 4 options because sometimes one option will be more specific than the other, and you might fall in the trap of falling for the trick of IB. So here the best thing is also to do is to underline words or sometimes highlighters. You can take those to the test. So here says what limits and the length of the food chain in the ecosystem. So it's all about the limitation here. It's all about the limits of the length of the food chain. So when we talk about the limits of the food chain, we can always talk about the organism. So we have, for example, organism A eaten by B, eaten by C, eaten by D. But as we go along that chain, there's always a 90% of energy that is lost every single time. And that energy that is lost is usually with feces and hair and bones, and even the cell respiration, where that means when the animal is doing his own activities and using energy. So that means only 10% is going to the next animal, 10% of energy. So you can see that the energy is lost. So by the time it gets to D, the energy is like 0.01%, very low energy. So here in the question, let's look at the 4 options. First, it says the size of individual organism. It has nothing to do with the size. Because sometimes you can see the B, C, and D, all of them can have exactly the same size. It says competition between organisms. There's no competition because only B eats A, only C eats B, and only D eats C in this one food chain. So it cannot be that. Then it says the loss of energy between trophic levels, and that's what it is. That's the right answer. And natural selection, it has nothing to do. Now, when I say trophic levels, we're talking about A being trophic level 1, B being trophic level 2, C being trophic level 3, and then D being level 4. So trophic level means it's the position in the food chain in which they are eating. So the right answer here is C. Moving on to the next question, it says the diagram represents a pyramid of energy. So if we're looking here at the pyramid of energy, you can see that the X represents the big one with the biggest energy. And the one who has the biggest energy to start will always be the producer. It will always be the plant. So in this case, let's look at which ones we have here. Light? No, that's not it. Many students put light, but you never put the sun, light, as the base, ever. Primary consumers will be this one, so it's not this. And abiotic do not have the energy, so the only thing left is D. So D is the answer for this one. Moving on here, it says what is lost between trophic levels in the ecosystem and cannot be recycled. So when we talk about what cannot be recycled, that means it's lost in the sense of energy. So for example, A, an organism goes to B, an organism goes to C, and then an organism goes to D. So one thing that is lost in the middle of the process is heat, as 90% of that things that were lost. However, the nitrogens and the carbon compounds, which are basically like carbs, proteins, and the biomass, which is basically the weight with the carbs, proteins. So these 3 here are basically saying all the carbons, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and we can keep on saying hydrogen, and oxygen. I can keep going. All of these elements are recycled. They're always being recycled in between what? Between the animal and the plant, going down to the soil when they die as decomposed, and then a plant takes the soil nutrients back up, plants goes ahead and make food, which is going to be eaten by the animal. And you can see there's a cycle going on, right? It's like saying the carb of the animal goes back to the plant, as well as the protein of the animal is going back to the plant, and then the plant gives its protein back to the animal. So these 3 right here is all the same. And when I say biomass, we're talking about carbs, proteins, lipids. So the only thing that is not recycled, that once it's gone, it is gone. It is the heat. So the heat that comes out of the body, it cannot be turned back to any other kind of energy. So the answer is A. That's the only thing that cannot be recycled. Here it says the animals at the highest trophic level of the food chain will often be the largest body size, but it will be in few numbers. So it's basically saying that often, what I say often doesn't mean always, but if the largest size, So there'll be few numbers. What accounts for the small numbers? So here's like saying, let's just say I have a plant that is, in this case, let's say it's a grass that is eaten by a grasshopper. And then the grasshopper is eaten by a frog. And then the frog is eaten by a snake. And the snake can be eaten by a human, right? So what they're saying is, why is there, and we see in the human, it has a bigger size than the snake, right? Now they're saying, what will be the few number? Few number means that if I have 100 plants, then maybe grasshoppers, I will have about 20. The frogs, I will have about, let's say 3. The snakes, I'll have 2. And then the human will be 1. So here's what I mean by a few numbers when you get to the highest trophic level, because this is the first trophic level, this is the second, this is the third trophic level, this is the fourth trophic level, and this is the fifth trophic level. So obviously, the reason why the human will be 1 is simply because as the energy moves on, right, only 10% of the energy is moved to the next as you go like this. So by the time they get to human, the energy will be very low. So think of this, if you had 100% of energy here, this one would have been just 10%, this would be 1%, this would be 0.1%, and then this is 0.1%. So the human is only receiving 0.01%. That means that human must eat like about 20 bites of the snake in order to have the same amount of energy if that frog was going to eat 1 bite of that grasshopper. So imagine, the frog just having 1 bite gets an energy that is equal to 20 bites of the human eating the snake. Why? Because the energy is starting to what? Decrease here. As you go along the food chain, the energy is dropping. So that means humans need to take more bites. In that sense, it's going to be just 1. Imagine if you have 5 humans here wanting to take just 2 snakes. Those humans are going to fight each other. They're going to slap each other, kill each other to get that snake. Because again, 1 bite of that snake is not enough. He doesn't have enough energy. So that one human, he will need to eat that 2 snakes for himself. So in that case, this is the reason why the number as you go up, it gets smaller. Because otherwise there will be competition happening here. So looking at the reasons here, we have first, A, food eaten by animals at the high trophic level has a lower energy content per gram. That could be a reason. So we don't know, so put a question mark. Here it says the energy losses through the food chain. That could also be a reason, so we put a question mark. Conversion of heat energy into chemical. We know that heat cannot convert back to anything. Once heat is done, it is done. It cannot go back to any kind of energy, so C is off. The biomass of the producer is small. No, the biomass of the producer will always be the biggest one. It always starts with the highest. And this is a no. So I know that students will always get confused between these two, A and B. Because one thing is true. Yes, the food eaten by animals at the house has a low energy content per gram. That is true. But they're asking what accounts for the smallest number. And the reason for the smallest number is not the fact that the food has lower energy. It's because the energy was lost. That's why once the energy was lost, that's where you get the lower energy content. So we're going to the specific answer, the one that has the real cause. See, yes, it's true that the energy is low, but that's not the cause. The cause is because the energy already is being lost throughout the chain. So the closest answer, it is B, and it's not A. So once again, just erase this to give it more clear for you guys to see. I know that many students will be lost between A and B. Both are not wrong, but the one that is the true cause, like the root of the root cause, like the beginner of all, is because the energy is lost through the food chain. And because of that, it leads to low energy content. So the answer here would definitely be B. Once again, gotta be very specific with IB. Moving to the next question here, it says the organisms, the food web is assigned to its method of nutrition. So we have here a food web, as you can see. And you can study this food web looking at the animals and the plants, who's eaten by who. So here we have the violet wetcap fungus. So you try to search for it, and you can see that it's right here. We have the pill bull, which the pill bugs is right here. We have bacteria, which is right here. And we have the violet fungus again. So we're going to look at these 3. That's what the analysis is about. It's about those 3. The first one says can be both autotroph and heterotroph. So that means they have to be a producer. And let's see if it is. and it cannot be a producer, because if it was a producer, as a producer, whenever you do this, there's an arrow going away from the producer to the first consumer, and you can see that the fungus doesn't have any arrow going out of him, so definitely that's a no. A pitbull is a secondary consumer. Pittsburgh right here, this is the first one, as you can see, and then you have as a primary the only chance, so it cannot be that one. Bacterias are saprotophes. Well, if you ever studied many times, you will know the bacteria is a saprophyte, so that could be the answer. Here, violet cap fungus is a detrivore. Now, a detrivore in this case, fungus, the word fungus here, it is also a saprotoph, because fungus eats on that material, not detritus, so it's not true. So this is basic knowledge. We know that saprotophs right here, examples of saprotophs are bacteria and fungus. So if you knew this, automatically you know that D is not it. So the answer is C. Moving to the next question here, it says, which process occur in the ecosystem? So we have here biomass increases in each successive trophic level. That's not true. If you remember when I had written here the grass, and then you had the grasshopper, and then you had the frog, and then you had the snake, right? Here, basically, you can start with 100, and then you start to reduce 20. You can say 5 and 2. So the biomass is actually, in this direction, is decreasing. So that it's not true. Inorganic nutrients are recycled. Now, is it true that the inorganic nutrients are recycled? That is true. It is possible. Like, for example, CO2, we know there's a carbon cycle, right? We also talk about nitrogen cycles. Yes, it's true. Okay. Chemical energy is stored in carbon compounds. Yes, because, for example, if you have a bond of a carbon bind to another carbon or bind to a hydrogen, this bond right here between them is actual chemical energy. And that means they're storing the energy in these bonds right here. So that means 3 is also right. So in this case, we only have 2 and 3 that is right, which that means it's C. Moving on to the next question here. The diagram shows the food web for an aquatic ecosystem, in which the letter Z represents the individual species. So here you can see there's a food web again. Now in the food web, you can notice that the arrows here coming from R, S, and T are basically saying that the R, S, T, these are producers, right? Because it's just coming out of them. Now we can see that W here is the primary producer. And if you go from W to Y, from T, so T is producer, W is worse, then Y can be a second. Or V can also be second. And then U can be a tertiary consumer. X can be, in this case, can be a secondary coming from W, but then coming from B, it can be tertiary. And this can be a quaternary or tertiary. So I kind of already analyzed all the types of producing can be. Remember, some organisms can be primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers. So the question says, which organism is tertiary consumer? Now, from my analysis here, we can see that U and X can be tertiary, but let's look at all the options. First, organism T. This one, it's a producer, so it cannot be it. Organism U, that could be an answer. Organism W. W, if you notice, it's always a 1, so it cannot be. Organism Y, Y can only be a second, or in this case, can also be a 5th coming from the 4th, so it's not. So the only answer here is B. That's the only option that gives us a tertiary. In this ecosystem, in the transfer of carbon from producers to consumers, what is the carbon transferred as? That means we know that the producer, which is the plant, and the plant does photosynthesis, right? And since the plant is doing photosynthesis, it is producing glucose, right, from CO2. And then it is eaten by, let's say, a human. So what is the human eating? Is eating the glucose. So in this case, we got to find something like glucose. Also, what else does that we can find in a plant that human eats? It can also eat proteins, right? Because plants have proteins. Think of lentils, think of chickpeas. These are all foods, plants that have proteins. So humans can also eat the protein coming from plants. So let's look at the first one. It says here, transfer of carbon from producers to consumers. So that means some carbon is going to be transferred from the plant to the human. Now, is carbon dioxide? No. Why? Because the plant absorbs carbon dioxide, so it can't be this. Is it protein? Yes. Can it be hydrogen carbonate ions? Hydrogen carbonate ions, these are not coming from the plants into the humans. It is not possible because this is more like fossil fuels coming in. So in this case, it is not. So hydrogen, so the only ones can be proteins. In this case, can only be B. And here we come to the last question related to the topic 4.2. Here shows basically a diagram that flows the energy through the ecosystem in kilojoules. Now here, you can see students get very freaked out because they're looking at this and they're looking like, oh my God, this is too complicated chart, but it really isn't. You can break it down by first reading it, and you will notice that there is some familiarity to you. First, we can see here, right, that there is the sun, and the sun has about 8 million of energy. That's what it's saying here. And then you can recognize the words primary producer, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary, and separatives. So you can see a food chain, right, going on here. Then you can see a bunch of numbers, and they say, what does these numbers mean? Well, then look at the sides. Here on the side, it says energy is lost by cellular respiration, and here it says energy is lost by separatives and digivores. Okay, so in here we have something written total respiration, which is 100,000. So now I'm going to erase this to make it seem more clear. And now I kind of see that some of the things I recognize, oh, there's some energy lost. Oh, there is a food chain going. Next, let's look at the numbers. Here you can see the primary producer says 100,000. And then because it says there's lost, that means 60,000 out of that 100 is lost for what? Cell respiration. And that leaves me with 40,000. But out of the 40,000, 20 is lost to the separatives and detrivores. So that means the primary consumers is only eating 20,000 out of that 100,000. Then that 20,000, 15,500 is gone for cell respiration, and then leaving it 4,500. But out of that 4,500, 2,500 is lost for the separatives, so that leaves me in the end with just 2,000 given for the secondary. From the secondary, 1,500 is given for cell respiration lost, and that leaves you with 500. Out of that 500, 400 is used for detrivores, so now the tertiaries are only getting 100% of the energy. And you can keep going. So now now I understand a little bit more, so I understand this graph. Once it's done, now let me go to the question. Question says, what percentage of the energy is passed from the primary producers? So that means we are talking about, let me put in a nice color here, primary producers to the primary consumers, which is right here. So that means I am focused between primary producers to the primary consumers, and whether it means the energy that is passed. The energy that is passed was 20,000, as you can see, right? Because when the producer had 100,000, 60,000 went this way and 20,000, which that means 80 was eaten by what was lost by energy, leaving me with just 20,000, right? Once again, I had 100,000, but I took 60 for cellular respiration and I took 20,000 for the separatives. So that means I am left with 20,000 that I'm going to give it to who? To the primary consumers. Okay. And then it says, what percentage of the energy passed from primary producer to primary producer is lost to cellular respiration by the tertiary consumers? So by the tertiary consumers, we're talking about cellular respiration. That means we're talking about this section. If you look at the tertiary, there's 80%. So the first thing says energy passed from primary consumers to was this. This is the 20%. That's the first part of the question. And then it says is lost to the cellular respiration by so 80 is the answer for the other one. Now, there's 80 lost for the tertiary. How do I do this? Basically, out of that 80, taking out of the 20,000 times 100 because I want to get the percentage. And that will lead me to 0.4%. So that is the answer. It will be D in this case. Why am I doing 80 over 20,000? Because they want to know here the question once again. Let me highlight this out. So here it says, what percentage of the energy passed from the primary producer to the primary is lost to the cellular respiration by tertiary? So this is a 20 that is coming for the primary. Out of the 20, there's 80. So that means 80 right here is the much that is used for cellular respiration. over whatever that 20. So I am trying to find out of that 20 the 80. And that's why we do 80 divided by 20,000 times the 100, because that's in percentages. Will give you 0.4. So once again, the answer is D. And these are the kind of questions that you can get for section 4.2 in the test. So most of them, you can see it's about the food chain, it's about the energy, and it's talking about the separators and the food webs. So if you know how to look at the food web and you know about trophic levels, then you're probably going to nail the questions when it comes to 4.2. And that's it. Thank you.